While trying to master her waterbending skills, a girl named Katara accidentally splashes water on her brother Sokka. Although he is not happy about this, he accepts her apology and says they need to continue their hunt for food. After walking for a while, they find nothing but a glowing sphere under the ice they're standing on. Sokka immediately breaks the ice, and a huge sphere emerges from the water. Because they don't know what it could be, Sokka tells Katara that they have to leave. However, Katara goes to break it, and a massive wind blows her away. As it opens, a bright light shoots into the sky, and after the sphere completely breaks, Katara and Sokka go closer to see what they can find. When they get closer, they see a flying bison named Appa and a young boy named Aang. Katara goes to him to ask who he is and how he got into the sphere, but Aang is too tired and can't speak. With this, Katara tells her brother that they need to take Aang back to their home in the Southern Water Tribe village. Sokka agrees, and they then take Aang home. A while later, Aang wakes up and thanks Katara for saving him. He says he ran away from home because he was upset, but he and Appa got caught up in a storm that forced them under the ocean. He then tells Katara that he's ready to leave. However, a prince from the Fire Nation named Zuko arrives at the village with his men after seeing the bright light in the sky, which is similar to how he knows a legendary hero called the Avatar will arrive. Sokka immediately goes to meet Aang and Katara to inform them of Zuko's arrival. He tells Aang to stay in the hut with some children until Zuko leaves. Katara follows Sokka outside, and just then, Zuko instructs his soldiers to bring out all the elderly people. As they do this, Katara and her grandma is among those brought outside. Shortly after, one of the soldiers enters the hut Aang and the other kids are hiding. Immediately, he sees that they're all kids. The soldier is about to leave, but suddenly, he takes a second look at Aang, and as he goes closer, he sees the tattoos on Aang's head, which indicates that he might be the one they're looking for. Aang is taken to Zuko, and after he also sees the tattoos, Zuko looks shocked and tells him that he'll kill all the villagers if he doesn't come with him, but Aang agrees and then leaves with Zuko. As Katara watches him get taken away, she is unhappy with this and tells Sokka that they need to help Aang. Even though he is hesitant at first, Katara convinces him, and as they see Appa playing with the kids in the village, they realize that they can use him to track the Fire Nation. Both of them then go on to meet their grandmother to ask if they can go and rescue Aang. Before they can talk much, their grandmother tells them to sit. She then says she has always wondered what Katara's destiny would be, since she's the first waterbender from the Southern Water Tribe in a long time. She tells them that Aang's tattoos mean he's an airbender, and since the next avatar is supposed to be an airbender, Aang could be the avatar. She goes further to explain that the avatar is the link between humans and the spirit world, which controls all nations. She also says the Fire Nation is chasing after the Avatar because they don't want to live by the Spirit's rules, so they killed all airbenders and started a war. She adds that with the Avatar's mastery of the 4 elements, which are fire, water, air, and earth, he'll be able to change hearts and stop the war. She then says she has now realized what Katara's destiny would be, and it's to protect the Avatar. With this, she allows Katara and Sokka to leave. Elsewhere, Zuko brings his uncle Iroh to take a look at Aang so he can perform some tests to confirm he's the Avatar. When Aang doesn't seem to like this, Iroh tells him that things will be fine, and after the tests, he'll be allowed to leave. Shortly after, Iroh performs the tests and Aang passes, confirming that he's the Avatar. Zuko tells Aang he's now his prisoner, and just as Iroh says he's honored to be in Aang's presence, Aang uses his airbending to escape from the room and fight some soldiers outside. As Aang then wonders what he'll do next, he sees Appa with Katara and Sokka on a cliff. Before Zuko can get to him, Aang escapes to join his friends. When he gets there, he thanks them for coming, but says he must return to his home immediately because he thinks the Fire Nation is up to something. Even though Aang offers to take them back to the village, Sokka and Katara decide to follow him. Meanwhile, Zuko and his uncle watch as Aang leaves with Appa. Iroh tells Zuko that it's a good thing that he found the Avatar, but Zuko is angry because he lost Aang. He tells Zuko getting Aang to the Fire Nation will get him back his honor after being banished by his father, who thinks he's too soft. Iroh, however, says that Zuko and Aang's destiny are tied together. After a while, Aang gets to his home, but doesn't see anyone. As he continues looking around the air temple, Sokka and Katara realize that Aang doesn't know that the people of the air tribe have been wiped out. Katara tells Aang that the Fire Nation killed them about 100 years ago because they knew the next avatar would come from there. Katara then says it could mean Aang was in the sphere for 100 years. Aang gets so angry that his tattoos start to glow, and he enters the spirit world where he sees a dragon spirit that calls him the Avatar and asks where he has been all this while. Aang looks confused and doesn't say anything before he returns to reality and gets calmer. Elsewhere, a commander of the Fire Nation, Zhao, sees Zuko on his ship while he's also traveling with his army. He tells his men to prepare a feast for lunch, and while they're eating, he gives a speech mocking Zuko about being banished. But Zuko stands up angrily and tells him that he'll regret his actions one day. Meanwhile, Sokka and Katara start asking Aang questions about the possibility of being the Avatar. Just then, they see a boy running toward them to hide. Katara immediately tells Aang to hide his tattoos, and shortly after, they see some Fire Nation soldiers running toward them. The men say they need to arrest the boy because he's an earthbender, but Katara says she can't let them take him away. She tries to use her water bending, but it doesn't end well, and Katara ends up freezing Sokka instead. With this, they're all arrested and taken to a nearby village of the Earth Tribe that is now controlled by the Fire Nation. As they walk into the village, Aang sees all the prisoners and learns that the Fire Nation is trying to suppress all other bendings, with most of the people held as prisoners in the village being earthbenders. Aang takes this as an opportunity to encourage the earthbenders to fight back. He doesn't get a response until he asks if they'll be ready to fight if the Avatar is around. Some of the men say the Avatar is dead, and if he were around, he would have helped them. Suddenly, Aang reveals his tattoos and tells them he's the Avatar. Before the Fire Nation soldiers can attack him, Aang starts using his airbending to fight the soldiers, much to their surprise. As he fights alongside Katara and Sokka, the Earthbenders join them until the soldiers are defeated. After that, the Earthbenders show Aang a place where they used to keep their bending scrolls, which the Fire Nation has invaded. One of the scrolls still in there falls, and a man gives it to Katara, saying it's one of the scrolls belonging to the Southern Water Tribe. Later on, Aang tells Katara and Sokka that he can't face the Fire Nation yet because he ran away before he could master all other three elements. He says that after being told he'd be the next Avatar, he was also informed that he couldn't have a family, and that was why he ran away. He then says the first element he must learn is water. Sokka says Aang can learn it from the powerful benders of the Northern Water Tribe, which is now ruled by a princess after her father's death. As Aang agrees to head there next, Sokka also suggests that they start taking back the small villages that are now controlled by the Fire Nation. Aang agrees, and they start their journey. While at it, Aang also tries to learn waterbending with the help of Katara's scroll, but it doesn't work for him. Elsewhere, Zhao meets with Zuko's father, Ozai, and tells him about an invaded library where they found several scrolls that could help them. He says his men are now decoding one of the scrolls about the moon and ocean spirits, which are important to the benders from the Northern Water Tribe. Ozai then asks about the Avatar, and Zhao says he's working on a plan to send his spies to catch him. Zhao also mentions that Zuko had his chance but missed it. Meanwhile, Zuko and Iroh stop at a nearby Fire Nation stronghold after a day of tracking down Aang. Iroh tells him that he doesn't need to continue his quest for Aang, but Zuko recollects the events leading to his banishment, including his father burning his face. He then tells Iroh he needs Aang to win back his father's trust. Days later, Aang tells Katara he needs to visit a nearby temple to see if he can speak to the dragon spirit again. Katara speaks to Sokka about letting Aang go, but Sokka thinks it's too dangerous. However, Aang leaves in the night without informing them, but they see him leave. As Aang gets to the temple, he sees an old man who immediately recognizes him as the Avatar. The man then shows Aang a place with the statues of all the past Avatars. Aang looks at it and talks about how he ran away. The old man asks for his forgiveness. Before Aang can understand the man, Fire Nation soldiers enter the temple to take him away, with the old man getting paid for helping them get Aang. Later on, while Aang is being held, he goes unconscious and enters the spirit world. The dragon spirit tells him that the Fire Nation is about to do something really bad. He also says he saw a vision of the moon turning red, and Aang must immediately get to the Northern Water Tribe. Before Aang can ask a question, he hears Zhao's voice and returns to reality. Zhao asks Aang why he keeps using only air and not the other 3 elements, but Aang doesn't respond, and Zhao says he won't kill him because he knows he'll be reborn again. Shortly after, while Zhao is speaking to his soldiers about capturing the Avatar, a masked man kills some soldiers until he saves Aang. Before they can leave, though, they have to fight the soldiers together. Suddenly, Zhao interrupts the fight and tells his men not to kill the Avatar. As the masked man then puts a knife around Aang's neck, Zhao asks who he is, but doesn't get a response. But Zhao seems to know who it is. He tells his men to let Aang and the masked man leave. However, as they leave the gates, Zhao instructs his men to shoot an arrow at the masked man. The man gets hit, and as Aang removes the mask, he sees that it's Zuko, and he immediately escapes with him. The next day, Zhao goes to report to Ozai that Zuko is responsible for Aang's escape, though he says he can't prove it. Ozai sounds surprised but tells Zhao not to harm Zuko. However, after Aang leaves Zuko in the woods, he wakes up and heads back to his ship only to see a gas leak that blows up the whole ship, with everyone believing he's dead. Meanwhile, Aang reunites with Sokka and Katara, after which they head to the Northern Water Tribe, where they meet the princess in charge, Yue. After arriving and stating their intentions, Aang starts his training with a master. Days later, though, the Northern Water Tribe soldiers hear about an imminent attack from the Fire Nation. They start coming up with a plan, and as the soldiers say someone must be with Yue when the Fire Nation arrives, Sokka volunteers to do it since he really likes her. Meanwhile, Zhao informs Ozai that he has found the location of the moon spirit. With this, Ozai orders that the spirit be eliminated to put an end to waterbending. Shortly after, Zhao sets out for the mission and brings Iroh along. While speaking to him, Zhao mocks him for being a failed general. He also shares his condolences for Zuko's death, saying he's sad to hear that he died in a fire. Because of how specific he is, Iroh believes Zhao ordered the strike on Zuko. After sneaking his nephew onto the ship, he tells Zuko and also warns him that it's not too late to forget about the Avatar, but Zuko insists that he must get Aang. When they get closer, Zuko escapes from the ship and makes his way into the Northern Water Tribe city. Meanwhile, Yue is in her palace when Aang tells her he needs to speak to the dragon spirit to find a way to defeat the Fire Nation soldiers who are now around. He asks if the city has a spiritual place, and the princess leads him to one. As he gets there, Aang says he needs to meditate to enter the spirit world. Immediately he starts, Katara offers to stay with him while Yue and Sokka leave. Not long after, Zuko appears and attacks her. She tries to fight back, but Zuko is too powerful for her, and she passes out while Zuko takes Aang away. As he drops Aang inside a room in the palace, he says he's waiting till the war ends before he takes Aang back home. Meanwhile, Aang is still meditating and inside the spirit world. He asks the dragon spirit what he can do to win the war, but the dragon spirit tells him that he's not supposed to use his powers to hurt people. He adds that Aang needs to stop seeking the revenge of his people. Before leaving, the spirit tells Aang to use the ocean and show the Fire Nation the power of water. When Aang wakes up, he hears Zuko lamenting about how his father Ozai has never really believed in him. As Aang tries to escape, Zuko sees him, and they start fighting. Meanwhile, Iroh tells Zhao that the soldiers need to come back before the moon's light brightens, because it will give the waterbenders more power. However, Zhao tells him he doesn't have to worry about it, because he's there to eliminate the moon spirit, leaving Iroh shocked. Elsewhere, Aang continues to hide from Zuko, who eventually finds him. Before he can do anything though, Katara comes over to help Aang by freezing Zuko's body. Katara then asks if Aang spoke to the dragon spirit, and he says he now knows what to do. Before Aang leaves the room, he tells Zuko to stay indoors to avoid getting killed. He also says they could be friends if Zuko wasn't just trying to kidnap him. As Aang and the others head out, they see Zhao and some other soldiers heading for the spiritual place. So Aang tells the others to follow them while he joins the war. While in the spiritual place, Zhao picks up a fish from a small body of water and calls it the moon spirit. As he's about to kill it, Iro tells him not to do it. Yue and the others are also there, and they tell him the same thing. But Zhao stabs the fish, and this allows Yue to fall, with Ang also feeling pain in his head. Not long after, the moon turns red, and as Zhao seems victorious, Iro gets angry and makes fire out of nothing to scare Zhao and his men out. The princess finally stands up, and as they're all looking at the dead fish in the water, she talks about how the spirit gave her life when she was little. Iro hears this and says, since there's still some part of the spirit in her, she can give up her life to save it. Even though Sokka doesn't like this, Yue says she has to do it. She eventually enters the water and gives her life to the spirit, allowing the moon to return to normal, leaving Zhao shocked. Shortly after, Zuko frees himself and goes to confront Zhao. As Zuko prepares to fight, Iro appears and tells him they must leave. This makes Zuko change his mind, but as he turns his back, Zhao attacks him with his fire, but Iro defends him. He then tells Zhao that his problem is that he's always alone. As they walk away, waterbenders appear behind Zhao, and they kill him. Meanwhile, Aang heads to the top of the high wall of the city's gates and looks at the ocean. He then starts to remember how he ran away from home, as well as the things the dragon spirit told him. Suddenly, he starts to lift the water until it gets higher than the wall, with his tattoos also glowing. Everyone stops to watch this, and the fighting stops, with Zuko and Iro also watching as they leave on their boat. Shortly after, Aang drops the water gently, after which Katara comes to see him, and he hugs her. Sokka also meets them, and together, they take Aang to meet all the soldiers, who then bow to him. Katara says they want him to be their avatar, and as he looks at them, Katara and Sokka also join the soldiers in bowing for him. With this, Aang bows and accepts to be the avatar. Elsewhere, Ozai complains about Zuko's failure to get the avatar. He asks his daughter Azula if she'll be up for the task of stopping Aang from learning earthbending and firebending. Azula looks happy, and she accepts the task gladly. Thanks for tuning in. A thumbs up would be amazing because I've got some bills to pay.
Back in my bag and I gotta brag, I do this shit for real. When we was down and we had nothing, we had to share a meal. We put the shit in overdrive with no steering wheel.